Welcome back to the Mad Genius Thesis. We always love to explore that fascinating and complicated relationship between creativity and mental illness. And today we're diving into the life and work of, well, a true cinematic titan. I mean, come on. Francis Ford Coppola, the man behind, classics like The Godfather and Apocalypse Now.
Yeah, and we're going to be using his career, which, was marked by both incredible successes, but also really crushing setbacks, to explore whether there's a link between those intense creative highs and the potential for mental health challenges.
Okay, so let's set the scene. It's 1971. Coppola, already an Oscar-winning screenwriter, is about to helm The Godfather, right?
Nice.
But his own film company, American Zoetrope, is on the verge of bankruptcy. The guy's so dedicated to this project that he's literally sleeping at the editing table, just, trying to impress Roger Corman, the king of low-budget filmmaking. What do you make of that?
It's intense, that drive. It's almost like a cliche of the tortured artist, right? I mean, it makes you wonder, was this level of commitment a sign of something deeper? Or is this just the price of admission for someone with such a grand artistic vision?
I think that's what we're going to unpack today. Coppola's story, I mean, it's full of these extremes, from the phenomenal success of The Godfather to, almost financial ruin because of One from the Heart.
And those swings weren't just professional, his personal life. It was marked by, really intense periods of strain on his marriage and the unimaginable tragedy of losing his son during filming. You can't help but ask, did these experiences, did they fuel his art, or was it the other way around?
Let's go back, rewind a bit to Coppola's childhood. He contracted polio when he was 9 years old, and then he spent a year paralyzed. I mean, that kind of experience at such a young age, it must have had some impact on him, don't you think?
Absolutely. I mean, we can't diagnose, from afar, but we know that early trauma can influence how someone copes with stress and how they form relationships, which, could affect their creative process later on.
And then there's his time at UCLA Film School. He didn't exactly follow the traditional Hollywood path, work his way up through the studio system.
No, he didn't. Instead, he took that side road, working on those Roger Corman exploitation films. His film school peers, they thought he was selling out, but Coppola saw it as a chance to learn the nuts and bolts of filmmaking, really hone his craft.
It always seems like he was driven to prove himself, to make his own mark.
Mm.
Do you see that kind of drive a lot in these artists that achieve this level of success?
It's a common thread, definitely. Often this burning desire to express oneself, create something unique and meaningful. And sometimes that drive can manifest as a need to defy expectations or even, rebel against the establishment.
Yeah. That rebellious streak definitely comes through in Coppola's career. I mean, the guy was notorious for clashing with studio heads, fighting tooth and nail for his artistic vision.
Well, yeah, like with The Godfather, for example. He was butting heads with all those Paramount executives, insisting on casting Marlon Brando, who at the time was pretty much considered box office poison. And let's not forget the sheer scale of the film. I mean, this was a sprawling epic that really defied the conventions of gangster movies.
And those clashes weren't, isolated incidents. He battled Warner Bros. While making the conversation and almost went bankrupt, self-funding. One from the Heart.
Yeah.
I mean, was this just a power struggle, or do you think there was something deeper going on, a deeper psychological need at play?
Well, it's fascinating to consider what might have motivated that need for control. I mean, was it about protecting his artistic vision, or was it maybe a way of compensating for feelings of powerlessness, perhaps, rooted in those early experiences of adversity?
Right. I mean, it makes you think about the toll that this constant battle might take. Was there a trade-off, a personal price to pay for that level of creative freedom?
Oh, absolutely. And this is where the mad genius stereotype starts to kind of crumble. Because while we romanticize the rebellious artist, we rarely acknowledge those potential consequences, the stress, the isolation, the burnout.
And it wasn't just those studio battles, right?
Yeah.
Coppola's personal life, it was far from a smooth ride. During the filming of Godfather II, his marriage was reportedly, under immense strain, maybe fueled by his, workaholic tendencies.
And then, of course, the devastating loss of his son Gio during the filming of Gardens of Stone. I mean, to go through that kind of grief while you're also dealing with the demands of a high-profile career, it's just almost unimaginable.
It makes you wonder how he even functioned at that time, let alone, continue to create such powerful and emotionally resonant films.
I know it's incredible. It speaks to a remarkable resilience, I think.
Mm-hmm.
But it also raises questions about, how artists might use their work to process trauma, to try and make sense of the unthinkable.
And that's where things get really interesting. because Coppola's films often delve into those dark and complex themes, don't they? Family's a recurring motif for sure, but it's never simple or sentimental. There's always an undercurrent of dysfunction, of secrets and betrayals.
Exactly. Like The Godfather. It's a film about family, for sure, but it's also a pretty brutal examination of the corrupting influence of power, of how loyalty and love can become twisted and destructive.
And then you have films like The Outsiders and Rumblefish, which explore the complexities of brotherhood and, the search for belonging, often in these harsh and unforgiving environments.
It's almost as if he's using his art to grapple with his own experiences, with the tensions and contradictions that exist within families, within ourselves.
So we've got this incredibly driven artist battling studios, facing personal tragedies, and just pouring all of that into his work. Where do we go from here?
Well, I think it's time we take a closer look at those films, at the specific choices he made as a storyteller. Because maybe that's where we'll find, the most compelling evidence of the link between his life and his art.
Sounds like we're just getting started. All right, so we're back. And I think, it's time to unpack some of Coppola's most iconic films, right? I'm especially curious about The Godfather. It just seems to touch on so many of the things we've been talking about: family, power, loyalty and betrayal, all that.
Oh, yeah, it's the perfect place to start. I mean, The Godfather, it's not just, a gangster movie. It's an American epic.
Yeah.
And you can see, I think, all those operatic influences that Coppola is known for. The heightened emotions, the grand gestures. It's like you're watching a Greek tragedy, unfold.
You mentioned that Coppola really pushed for Marlon Brando to play Don Vito Corleone, even though the studio, well, they weren't too keen on it. Why was that casting so important? I mean, what did he see? Well, I mean, Brando, right. At that point, he was considered washed up. But Coppola, he saw something else. I mean, a vulnerability, a quiet menace. And it just captured the duality of the character. It was a big risk. But it paid off. I mean, brilliantly. Brando's performance, it's legendary. I mean, it defines how we imagine a mafia don.
And it wasn't just the casting, was it? Coppola also insisted on shooting on location in New York and Sicily, right? Which, gave the film an authenticity that studio sets could never replicate.
He was creating a world, like a whole universe that felt real, lived in. And that attention to detail, that commitment to realism, it extended to every aspect of the production, I think.
But that realism, it came at a price. The shoot, it was, well, notoriously difficult. Coppola clashing with the studio, budget overruns, creative differences, all that.
It's that, relentless pursuit of his vision, isn't it, that we keep coming back to. He wasn't afraid to fight for what he believed in, even if it meant, risking his whole career. And in this case, it paid off. It transformed, I think, not just the gangster genre, but cinema itself.
The Godfather was a huge success, right? Won 3 Oscars, Best Picture and Best Adapted Screenplay for Coppola and Mario Puzo. So it was a big deal.
But it set a bar that would be so difficult to surpass, I think. The pressure to deliver a sequel that lived up to the original, it must have been immense.
And then during the filming of Gardens of Stone, his son Gio, he died tragically in that boating accident.
I can't imagine, the emotional weight of that. Trying to create art while dealing with, such a profound loss.
Yeah, it's heartbreaking. And yet, Coppola, somehow he found the strength not just to finish Gardens of Stone, but to also deliver Godfather II, which I think many people consider even richer and more complex than the original Godfather. Godfather II is interesting, right? Because it jumps between those two timelines, showing the rise of Vito Corleone in the early 1900s, alongside Michael's descent into darkness in the 1950s.
I think that parallel structure, allows Coppola to explore those themes of legacy and corruption in a way that's really nuanced. You see how power, even when it's obtained, with good intentions, can still corrupt the people that wield it.
And Michael's story, it's especially tragic, right? He starts out wanting to legitimize the family business, but he ends up becoming even more ruthless, more isolated than his own father.
It's a classic Shakespearean arc, really. It's the tragic hero who is brought down by, their own ambition, the weight of their family's legacy. And you have to wonder, did Coppola see echoes of his own struggles in Michael's journey? It's hard not to think about that.
It is hard not to, draw those parallels, especially given all the turmoil in Coppola's personal life at the time. He was battling his own demons, both, internal and external. And Godfather II, it feels like a film made by someone, well, wrestling with those very questions of power and morality and, the cost of ambition.
Right. And then, of course, there's Apocalypse Now, right? Coppola's, epic reimagining of Joseph Conrad's Heart of Darkness. set against the backdrop of the Vietnam War.
Yeah, this film feels like a total departure from The Godfather, I think.
Oh,
It's surreal, hallucinatory, almost nightmarish, especially in its depiction of war and, the psychological effects.
well, I mean, the production of Apocalypse Now was notoriously chaotic, which, mirrors the descent into madness that the film depicts. Coppola battled typhoons, dealt with Marlon Brando's unpredictable behavior, and even had a heart attack during filming.
So it sounds like making the film was almost as intense as the film itself, huh?
Oh, yeah, for sure. And that intensity, it just, seeps into every frame. Coppola uses sound and visuals in a way that's both mesmerizing but also disorienting. You're pulled into this world of, violence and chaos, and you can almost feel the character's sanity unraveling, along with, I think, the narrative.
It's full of these iconic images, right? The helicopters attacking to the strains of Wagner's Ride of the Valkyries, the shadowy figure of Colonel Kurtz, the river journey. It's all a descent into, well, the heart of darkness.
It's a film that, gets under your skin and stays with you long after you've seen it. And it raises some really challenging questions about war, I think. The limits of sanity, the dark side of human nature, maybe.
Apocalypse Now.
Yeah.
I think it solidified Coppola's reputation as, well, a visionary filmmaker, but it also almost destroyed him. He poured everything he had into that project, both physically and emotionally.
And then after Apocalypse Now, he took a huge risk with One from the Heart. A visually stunning, yeah, but commercially disastrous musical love story that he self-funded, and it almost bankrupted him.
This is the film, right?
Mm-hmm.
That many point to as evidence of Coppola's mad genius tendencies.
Mm-hmm.
His willingness to gamble everything on, a project that a lot of people saw as self-indulgent and, out of touch with audiences.
But even though, yeah, it was a flop financially, One from the Heart, it shows off, I think, Coppola's incredible, technical skill, his willingness to experiment with new storytelling techniques. I mean, he built elaborate sets, used cutting-edge video technology, and created a world that was both artificial and dreamlike. It's pretty wild.
It's interesting that he chose to make a musical, at that point in his career. After such intense and, emotionally draining films like The Godfather and Apocalypse Now, was he looking for an escape, do you think? From the darkness? Create something, I don't know, lighter, maybe hopeful?
Maybe. It's possible. Or perhaps he was drawn to the challenge of, I don't know, trying to capture the fleeting nature of love and desire, trying to capture that in a cinematic form. Either way, I think One from the Heart is a fascinating anomaly in his filmography, a film that is both deeply personal and, strangely detached from the realities of his own life.
Coppola's career, I mean, it's been marked by, well, these swings, right? Between that grand ambition and intimate storytelling. He's just as comfortable making, epic war films as he is with those smaller, more character-driven pieces like The Conversation and Rumblefish.
That's what makes him so compelling, I think. He's constantly pushing himself, trying new things, taking risks. And even though those risks don't always, pay off, they reveal this creative restlessness. It's both inspiring and a little bit terrifying, I think.
So where does all of this leave us? I mean, in terms of the Mad Genius Thesis, I mean, have we seen any evidence of a link between, Coppola's creative brilliance and his potential for mental health challenges? What do you think?
Well, it's complicated. On the one hand, his life and career, they've been marked by extremes, intense highs, devastating lows. He's clearly someone, I think, who feels things deeply and is driven by, a powerful creative force that can sometimes be destructive.
But isn't that true? I mean, for a lot of artists who achieve a certain level of greatness, is it fair to say that Coppola's struggles are, somehow more significant, maybe indicative of a deeper psychological issue than other creative individuals?
That's the question, I think, that we need to grapple with. Because while it's tempting to romanticize that mad genius myth, it's also important to remember that mental health, it's a complex issue, and it can't be reduced to, these simple stereotypes.
And, I mean, ultimately, Coppola's story is his own. We can analyze his films, speculate about his motivations, but we can never fully understand, the inner workings of his mind. What we can do, I think, is appreciate the work he's created and acknowledge that his journey, like all human journeys, has been filled with, both triumph and tragedy. And that's not a sign of madness, I don't think, but rather, a reflection of just how complex it is to be human.
Well said. I think that sets us up perfectly for the final part of our deep dive, where we'll, examine the ethical considerations of the mad genius myth and explore what we can learn from Coppola's legacy. Are you ready to tackle those?
Absolutely. Let's do it. Okay, so we've spent all this time, right, unpacking the life and work of Francis Ford Coppola, a filmmaker whose career, well, it's been a real roller coaster ride. Artistic brilliance, personal turmoil, the whole thing.
Yeah, we've seen how, that relentless pursuit of creative control that he has, how it led to those clashes with the studios, the financial risks, even, physical and emotional strain.
And through it all, I mean, the guy's produced some of the most iconic, enduring films in history, right?
Yeah.
But we're still left with this question, I think. Does his story, does it actually support the idea of the mad genius? Or is that just, a convenient narrative, something we impose on artists who just, defy convention?
It's a tough one, and I think there's a real danger in, oversimplifying it. We can't just point to all the chaos in Coppola's life and say, see, there it is. Genius and madness, totally intertwined,
Because I think that kind of thinking, it just perpetuates those harmful stereotypes. It romanticizes mental illness and ignores the fact that a lot of artists, even the ones who achieved incredible success, live relatively balanced lives.
Exactly. And it can also discourage people from seeking help, when they need it. I mean, if we start to believe that suffering is like a prerequisite for creativity, well, then we might be less likely to reach out for support when we're struggling.
So how do we reconcile this? The fact that, Coppola's life has definitely been marked by both extraordinary creativity and these personal challenges.
Nuance, I think. We need to acknowledge just how complex the human experience is and resist that urge, to reduce individuals to these easy labels.
And we need to be careful, right, about drawing causal links. Just because someone experiences mental health challenges, doesn't mean that those challenges are like the source of their creativity or vice versa.
Absolutely. There are so many factors that contribute to both, right? Creativity and mental health. Genetics, environment, life experiences, it all plays a role.
What's interesting to me is that Coppola himself, he's pushed back against that mad genius label. He said that while he's, obviously passionate about his work, he's also a dedicated family man. Enjoys the simple things in life. He's a human being.
That's important. We tend to focus so much on the dramatic stuff, right? The scandals, the breakdowns, but we forget about those quieter moments. The everyday, joys and struggles, all the things that make up a human life.
I think we're just, drawn to that myth, aren't we? The tortured artist. The idea that, great art has to come from a place of pain and suffering. But that myth, it can be damaging, both to artists and to our understanding of how creativity actually works.
Yeah, we need to shift the conversation. Instead of asking, are genius and madness linked, right? Let's ask, how can we better support artists so they can thrive creatively and personally?
What would that look like? Practically speaking.
I think it means, creating environments where artists feel safe to take risks, to experiment, to fail without being judged or rejected.
And it means providing access to mental health resources, destigmatizing mental illness, right? And recognizing that seeking help, that's a sign of strength, not weakness.
And maybe most importantly, I think, it means celebrating artists for their humanity, their resilience, their ability to create beauty and meaning even when they're faced with adversity.
Because that's what we're all drawn to in art, right? That ability to connect with something larger than ourselves, to find solace and inspiration in the stories that others tell.
Exactly. And I think Coppola's films, despite their darkness, their complexity, they offer us glimpses of hope, of redemption, the enduring power of the human spirit. And that's something worth celebrating.
So I guess as we wrap up this whole deep dive, into the life and work of Francis Ford Coppola, I think it's important to remember that mad genius myth, it really is just that. It's a myth.
It is. Let's move beyond, those simplistic labels. Embrace the complexities of both creativity and mental health.
Let's support artists, not just, for their talent, but also for their humanity. And let's continue to, be inspired by the stories they tell, the worlds they create, and the enduring power of art to connect us all.
Well said. I think it's time for us to say goodbye.
Thanks for joining us, everybody. We'll see you next time.